Hey, I'm Jenna Wolf, certified lactation counselor, parent coach, and extended breastfeeding mom of two. I fully understand the unique challenges of breastfeeding beyond the baby days, and I'm here to take your hand and support you along your journey. So toss that hair in a messy bun, grab a basket of laundry to fold, and let's get started. This is Start to Stop Toddler Breastfeeding. In this episode, I interview Katy Weber, who was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 45 and has made it her mission to help neurodivergent women learn to love their brains. She has spent the last 7 years coaching women to change their mindsets and reframe their self-concept so that they can finally recognize and lean into their gifts and abilities. She's an author, a public speaker, certified holistic health coach, and certified yoga instructor. She also spent 15 years as a newspaper editor and designer, and she's currently pursuing an MS in clinical mental health counseling. She lives in Hudson Valley, New York with her husband, kiddos, dogs, and cats. And she is the host of the Women in ADHD podcast, which is ranked among the top 0.5% of all podcasts globally. Katy has been a really important, actually, part of my life in the last more recent years, as I have discovered and learned more about my ADHD diagnosis. And in this episode, we talk about what it's like to be an adult woman with ADHD, what it's like to go through the diagnostic experience, why you may choose to do that, and really what's on the other side of that and what resources are available. So if you've ever thought, maybe I have ADHD, or maybe you've never thought you had ADHD, but you feel like you're struggling in ways that other people just aren't, be sure to listen to this episode. And if you already have an ADHD diagnosis, tune in as well, because we discuss resources and ways to support yourself as a woman with ADHD, which is exactly what Katy's specialty is. I do find that women breastfeeding toddlers, I feel, I don't have real stats on this, but I feel that are like overrepresented. Women struggling with breastfeeding toddlers tend to, in my experience, more often than not, be ADHD. Rather than not. So it was really important for me to bring Katy on so that we could talk about this, so that there's a resource that you all have who are tuning into this podcast, and that you can really understand yourself better and support yourself and your kiddo better. So without further ado, here is the interview. Katy, it is so wonderful to have you here today. And it totally feels full circle because the first podcast interview that I did was on your podcast. So it's so exciting to have you on podcast now.
So I'm just so excited to see you again.
Yeah, I feel like I talk actually about you. I feel like I've thrown your name out once or twice on the podcast already, and I've only been doing this for a few months so far. So I feel like people probably know about you a little bit who have listened to this podcast, but I'd love to hear from you a little bit about your business, like Women in ADHD, and the coaching that you offer, and kind of what you have set up there, and then how you kind of got into that. Like, what led you to transitioning into coaching women with ADHD?
Yeah, where do I start? So I founded Women in ADHD, the company, after I started a podcast called Women and ADHD, which was shortly after I was diagnosed at the age of 45 in 2020. It was shortly into the pandemic that I was diagnosed. So I called myself a pandemic diagnosis because I feel like there's a lot of us out there who had like a little bit of a meltdown during lockdown. And it led to, connecting a lot of dots around ADHD. So I was diagnosed, and it was such a profound, life-changing experience for me in terms of just revisiting all of these random struggles that I had seemed to have, and these patterns throughout my life, and just suddenly realizing that it all connected to this neurodivergent diagnosis. And it just felt so incredibly profound, but also like when I would say I was diagnosed with ADHD, I never felt like anybody really understood what I was talking about. Right. And there was, and you get this, I was so happy to have found out about ADHD. Yes. And it was really just like this life-changing, wonderful moment. I felt like a phoenix rising from the ashes. And the response from a lot of people was like, oh, I'm sorry about your disorder, or I'm sorry you're
Yeah.
struggling. And I'm like, no, I'm not struggling now. I was struggling before, right?
Exactly.
So I was just like, I wanted to chat with other women who were mostly, initially I wanted to just chat with other women who were diagnosed in adulthood and find out if they had had a similar experience and how their life had changed, or, what were some of those signs that led up to them also discovering they had ADHD. And so I started the podcast because I was, at home during lockdown and I wanted an excuse to reach out to people and not seem creepy. So I was like, all right, and as one does with ADHD, I'm like, I know, I'll make this super complicated and interesting and start a podcast. And
Exactly.
right.
Of course. Yeah.
So I did that, and it just kind of took off. I had no idea anybody was going to listen to this podcast, much less really, really relate to these stories, and just find listening to other people's experiences so much more helpful and nourishing and validating than perhaps your typical, like, here's 5 tips to be more productive, right? Some of those
Yes.
kind of ADHD podcasts. And so I'm just really touched that it has been as helpful for so many other women out there listening as it has been for me to have these interviews and to have these conversations with women. So it was about a year after I started the podcast when I was like, oh, this is really taking off, that I, realized that one of the fundamental parts of this experience, of this like self-discovery journey is community, right? It's forming community, it's finding each other, it's having these conversations with each other. And so shortly after I started the Women in ADHD, I guess it was probably about 6 months after I started the podcast, I started the online community. And, it's really sort of just similar to Facebook, but away from Facebook, where we can just share memes and vent and talk. And then I started the book club, which was kind of also like a funny random story, because I had heard I listened to the book, The Radical Guide for Women with ADHD by Sari Solden and Michelle Frank. It's a workbook. So there's a lot of like writing down answers. And I listened to it and I was like, this is really, really good book. I should buy it and actually fill out the workbook. And so I bought the workbook. And of course, because I have ADHD, it just sat next to my bed. I never filled it out. And I thought, oh, I should start, I was like, if I'm not going to fill out these questions, maybe if I like get a bunch of people together, we'll fill them out together and we can be accountable to each other. We can go through this workbook together. So I started that. And that also, I think, has just been a wonderful opportunity for women to get together and to just talk about their experiences.
Yeah, I'd love to like pause you for only a second, because I had just thought maybe I have ADHD and decided to talk to my psychiatrist when I typed into Spotify in the search box, Women and ADHD, not knowing that that was the name of your podcast. And it was the episode you did with Sari Solden that came on. And I was like hanging on every word and like, oh my God, I just felt so seen and understood. And you like, at the time you were promoting the book club, and I was like, yes, this is it. I'm in. Like, there's no question about it. And it was just, I just want to say that like your community, it was just like falling into these like loving, warm hugs. Like it was just like this like embrace that I needed right then. Like, I'm not alone and I'm not crazy. And like, this makes so much sense, And I mean, I could go on a huge rabbit trail about that, but I was like, you just brought that up and I was like, that's the time that I connected with you and was just doing so much work myself. So how beautiful is that? I love that.
You're giving me goosebumps. I know. It's really my of all the things I do, the book club has become my absolute favorite thing. It brings me so much joy. I've done it 4 times now. And I just keep offering it and doing it. And it's just, I love it. I just feel like a little shepherd with my new flock.
Yeah.
Because some of these women, it really is the first time they've even talked about this with anybody. And yeah, it's just, I find it so nourishing. So yeah. And then also, before I was even diagnosed with ADHD, I've been coaching for a long time. about 7 years. I've been coaching. I used to be a journalist for a long time. And then when my son was born, I pivoted because I was, a stay-at-home mom and was, starting my 18th business and decided to get certified as a health coach. So I had started initially as health coaching, and I was working on diet recovery and binge eating recovery, which I had no idea at the time because I hadn't been diagnosed with ADHD. I had no idea at the time how prevalent binge eating is among women with ADHD and just eating disorders in general. And so that was really, really eye-opening to me after my diagnosis. And I wanted to call all of my old clients and be like, guess what? We all have ADHD. And so, but, more and more, I think as the podcast grew and as the community grew, I have slowly pivoted more into just general ADHD coaching and offering the programs and the group programs and the book club and that kind of stuff. So that's sort of where I'm at.
I love your podcast. I love your business. I love all of that because it's been so profound for me. And I feel like I could, be an affiliate for you or something from the amount of people I'm like, go check out Katy, and like sending them to the community and sending them to the book club. And I love the resources that I've personally discovered through you, just with like money management stuff and like intuitive eating. Like I love the ADHD and intuitive eating. And what else? Like, medication, Kaylin Johnson, you've had all these people on that like just have been so supportive for me in my journey. So it's always like, if I need something, I know that Katy has a resource for it. And so it's like, I just know that that's there. And it's like, it's just really great for me, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, because just to caveat for like a moment, when women are breastfeeding, their estrogen levels go down, which is that time, and then perimenopause and menopause are both times where women tend to get diagnosed with ADHD or really start to struggle with symptoms that have always been there, but they really become profound in those transitions in their life. But also just like, physiologically, their bodies are, displaying more traits simply because of, chemistry and their hormones, right? So what I find a ton is that there's a lot of moms who think maybe I have ADHD, and we could talk about the pandemic and all of these different things that would kind of culminate right now, but also at this kind of stage in their parenting. And it's funny that you were even like, well, I was a stay-at-home mom. And that's when I, transitioned into coaching because everything was like going on after I had my child. And it's like, of course, because like if you have ADHD, that's like an extra epic transition for you in so many ways, right? So I'm slightly getting off track here, but I know that there's a lot of women who are listening to this podcast and are like, I think I have ADHD, or like for me, right? It was like all the memes and all the TikToks. Somehow my whole TikTok feed is all about neurodivergence. How did this happen? And it's like, probably because you related to it and you kept watching and the algorithm was like, I'm going to keep sending you more of those things, right? So I'm curious to know kind of your experience of kind of saying, maybe I have ADHD, right? Like you were talking about the pandemic and all of these pieces too. And then kind of just more on like a general level, like what's the general, like if somebody's in that position, what do they have? What's available to them? What's here? What can they do? So kind of two separate questions, but we'll get there.
Right. I think TikTok is such a wonderful resource because, it's not one of the things that I think really brings so many of us to our ADHD diagnosis is not even the term ADHD, right? Like when you hear ADHD, it's like, I'm not hyperactive. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have an attention issue. What does that even mean, right? I have, I'll have copious amounts of attention sometimes. Like it's such a misleading acronym in the first place. Yes. And so many of us, especially women, when my therapist first started suggesting I might look into it, my first reaction was like, I was offended. Like I was like, do you really think I'm that screwed up? Like I just sort of felt like, do you think I'm not an adult? Like I just had all of these misconceptions and stereotypes about what ADHD was. It's a little boy who couldn't sit still. I didn't relate to it at all. And so I think what is so why there's been this real kind of renaissance of adult women diagnoses, or not even a renaissance. What's the word I'm looking for? Just, explosion
Yeah.
of adult women and diagnoses is, from places like TikTok and Instagram, where you're seeing the lived experience of what this actually looks like. And so we're not talking about, not being able to sit still in your chair so much as we're talking about the internalized hyperactivity that leads to starting a new business, even though you're a stay-at-home mom and like always wanting to do all these things, right? Or just, like one of the things that I remember never really being able to like feel present with my kids. Like I always had to be up and moving, and we were always going to Target and grocery stores. And like, I felt like a terrible mom because I couldn't just sit and play Legos. Right. Like, and so like some of those ways where I was like, I look back and I'm like, oh, maybe I do have a touch of the hyperactive. I just never saw it as, and so when we start sharing our lived experiences, you're like, oh, I realize that not only does ADHD have to do with some of that stuff about like, I can never feel relaxed. I can never really like appreciate my downtime, some of that stuff, but also the deeply held shame around some of that stuff, which is, I'm such a bad mom because I can't sit still with my kid and play dolls, right? Or I'm such a bad mom. Like it's always, it's the way in which we judge ourselves as though these are like deeply flawed characteristics. And so, I think so many of us relate to, just how damaging our self-concept is as a result of undiagnosed ADHD. And so many of us are diagnosed with depression and or anxiety or some kind of mood disorder long before our ADHD diagnosis. So much so that I'm almost like, if you've been diagnosed with postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety as a power duo, that's almost like it's almost pretty much a guaranteed precursor.
Like go and like, do a screening test. I relate to that so much. And even for me too, it was the executive functioning stuff too, where like I would struggle to get my kids dressed to take them outside to play. It was like I had a hard time putting the tasks in order, and it felt so overwhelming to say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to get the shoes on, we're going to get the coats on, we're going to go outside, I'm going to set this up. And to like, I had so much shame around that too. Like I'm not a good mom because I can't, or like my house not being, spotless, and always struggling with those things too. So it was the lived experiences of other people that was like, oh my gosh, that's ADHD, And yes, to the anxiety and depression and all of those pieces coming beforehand too. Like, yeah.
Well, another thing, I mean, executive dysfunction too, it wasn't a term I'd ever heard of before I had been diagnosed. I didn't know anything about it. I don't understand why we're not taught executive functioning skills in school. Like, why are they teaching us to sew? They should be teaching us how to like really kind of intentionally learn how to prioritize and do some of these things that so many of us struggle with. But for me, I think one of the biggest things that blew my mind with the ADHD diagnosis was emotional regulation and emotional dysregulation, and how much that affected me as a mom, as a wife, and I never made the connection that there was like that my emotions were tied to stimulation and being overstimulated. And that I think was so profound, because there was so many experiences. There's so many moments where like I would just fly into a rage and I had no idea why. And I felt like my husband was always walking on eggshells around me. I would yell at my kids and I just see that look in their face of just being like, oh God, what did I do? Like I felt so out of control in terms of my rage sometimes as a mom. And I had no idea. I mean, I sort of vaguely knew. I was like, God, I really need a good night's sleep or something like that. But I had no idea how much that was tied to just being overstimulated in terms of touch, in terms of noise, in terms of like, whether I was feeding myself properly or, hydrated or sleeping. Like there's so many of those elements that were a mystery to me before my diagnosis, where I had no idea. And then suddenly I'd just be treading water and then, yelling at everybody. And I felt like a terrible person again, right? It always came back to that question of like, God, what is wrong with me that I can't stop yelling at everybody? So, and there's nothing about emotions or emotional regulation and ADHD in the DSM. It's, if you go, not a lot of psychiatrists will ask you about that. So I feel like many women, especially, really relate to the emotional elements of
Yeah.
ADHD more than the
Yeah.
physical stuff.
Yeah. And I like 100%. I talk about like nervous system regulation, like I have my program and that's like a huge part that we talk about. And like for me, that comes into like the physical regulation. And then when we talk about the hyperactivity in the brain, like your brain is overstimulated with your thoughts. And like so there's like this external stimulation from all of these pieces, like, and then when you have this hyperactivity, I literally call it like tigers in your brain. It's like you've got these like things kind of like lurking around every corner and they all like add up when you've got all of these different pieces that are sitting in your brain. And then you've got the, executive function or dysfunction piece where you can't sort through those and prioritize them. And so everything's sitting there. And then every time you turn around, you've got the, object permanence or object impermanence where you see something and it's reminding you of something you've completely forgot about and it's all piling up. And of course, you're blowing your top, right? Of course. And then when you're breastfeeding on top of it and you've got kids that are climbing on you. And then when we talk about toddler breastfeeding, and now not only do you have all the shame and like, all of those pieces from perhaps thinking that you're lazy or thinking that you're constantly, but now you have all this, like, maybe I'm messing up my kids and maybe I'm not, like, and they shouldn't still be breastfeeding and they should be sleeping through the night. And like, it just piles up and up and up and up. And oh man, like I get it 100%. And I think it's really important that you mentioned that because it isn't something that when you just Google, like, do I have ADHD? It's not a piece that comes up as like, if you're experiencing this, maybe that's why. So I'm really grateful that you did bring that up.
Right. And I think that there are, so many ways in which it's presented on the online in terms of like questions can be, using terms like executive function, where before my ADHD diagnosis, I wouldn't have related to that. I wouldn't have known what that meant. So, really I think that's why it's so important to have these conversations about like what it looks like in real life, right? Like how it manifests in our lives. And then when you're listening to somebody talk about it and you're nodding your head over and over, being like, oh my God, this is explaining my whole life. Those are those moments where it's like, yeah, you might want to get it checked out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, for me, there was like school, I did have issues. Like I struggled. It was only my anxiety that pushed me through enough that I was able to stay somewhat afloat until I couldn't in university and it all kind of exploded on me. And I think that that's like an experience, like, it's like, well, I did fine in school, like, and some people have PhDs and whatnot that absolutely have ADHD. And it's a lot of times the anxiety that's keeping them going, until it doesn't. So we have like all of these different, pieces and these experiences. And I think that it's just really, really is important to kind of like bring them to light and be honest about what that actually looks like. And it is vulnerable too, because there is shame around those things in so many ways, right? So I think it takes people who have done a little bit of work around it to kind of like work through that shame, to be able to be honest, that we can kind of like unchain other people around us. It's like being honest about that kind of like breaks the shame where they're like, oh yeah, me too. Right. And then everyone can start getting the support that they ultimately need. And a lot of that support begins with just straight up self-compassion, like it's like, yep, me too. I'm there. And it helps so much. So with that being said, Katy, for anyone who's listening and they're like, oh my God, maybe that's me, right? Or like, I've always wanted to say, like, it's scary to bring it up to my doctor. It's scary to, to do these things. What was kind of like your experience with getting support? And then what are some ways that you support your clients and your community to get support if they suspect or are newly diagnosed with ADHD?
Yeah, it's funny because one of my pet peeves is when somebody is officially diagnosed. So often the experience is, yes, here's your official diagnosis. Here's a prescription for medication. Okay, goodbye. Good luck. And it's kind of it's presented in this way that the medication is somehow going to solve everything, and very rarely is that the experience. Many of us, either medication doesn't work for us, there's too many side effects, or it's just not the right choice. And so I feel like there is a lot of additional supports. I think the quote unquote treatment plan, when I talk about that with ADHD, it involves so many approaches. And it really is one of the things, it's not just the kind of disorder where you take a pill and everything's fine. That said, medication can be incredibly helpful for many people. So I really do encourage it. And I do, when people say, is there really a point in getting officially diagnosed? That's really the big thing is to get officially diagnosed. Then you can start playing with getting the right medication for you. And I think it's really important to at least try. So where I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about? So, when I was first diagnosed, one of the things I was really helpful for me was checklists. And I always encourage people, if you're going to your doctor, doctors are going to be looking for evidence of ADHD, especially in your childhood. And that can be really difficult because many of us, like you said, many of women, their experience was they did well in school. They really behaved. This is something about when you're social, especially that we talk about a lot when being socialized as girls, is that, we're taught to really be small and behave. And so not very many of us had the experience of our teachers saying, your kid has ADHD, you might want to look into it for her parents. Many, many women did very well in school, white knuckled it through high school, and then eventually at some point, anxiety, some catalyst came along where the anxiety couldn't fuel them anymore. And, something happened that, that had that epic meltdown, as I call it. Right. So, masking is, I don't know how much you want to get into masking, but masking is such a huge part of the undiagnosed experience, which is really kind of like presenting ourselves in a way that we feel like, we're showing up. We use the example of the swan a lot. I don't know if you've talked about that already, but this calm, this calm swan on the surface, everybody thinks you're doing great, but underneath you're madly paddling and you just feel like you're doing so much work. You're just treading water to keep up appearances. And so, it can be difficult to explain to a doctor what the evidence of was in childhood over the course of your life. So I feel like checklists can be a really helpful resource, not only for yourself and your own self-discovery of like, oh, wow, I had no idea that, being anxious about somebody coming over to my house unannounced had ties to ADHD or road rage, speeding, all of these ways in which you're like, oh yeah, okay, I get that. That makes sense. So my favorite checklist is the one written by Sari Solden, and you can find it on Attitude magazine, and it's specifically for women. And I think that really gets into a lot of the emotional, social shame elements that we've talked about. And it's less focused on the DSM questions like, are you driven by a motor? Which I find I don't know, aren't we all? It's just random questions that I never related to. So that checklist, I have a couple of checklists on my website too, on the resources page. That
I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes. So if you're listening, you can go and click on the show notes. It'll all be there.
So yeah, some of my favorites that are just printable checklists that you can bring to your doctor that just give you an opportunity for conversation so that you're not just going to your doctor and saying, I saw a TikTok video and I'm pretty sure I have ADHD, because usually that's not what happens. Usually you see a TikTok video, you see another one, suddenly your For You page is nonstop ADHD videos. And it's like your whole life starts to flash before your eyes and you're doing hyper-focused research and you're doing all this digging. But if you have ADHD, you're going to go to the doctor and you're going to be completely tongue-tied. You're not going to know what to talk about. You're going to feel rushed and you're going to be like, I don't know what to tell you, and then the doctor shoves you out of the office. And so sometimes I'm like, look, if you find doctor's visits traumatic, that should be enough to tell you that should be your diagnosis, right?
You're speaking my language, Katie.
That's why
I can't even walk into. I still see a doctor that I had seen when I was a teenager, and when I walk into the waiting room, it was panic attacks because I was like, oh my gosh, this was stressful for me. I mean, not the doctor itself, but just the whole experience of having to articulate and having to remember why I was there in the first place and all of that. Yes, 100%.
They give you all this information and shove you out the door. And there's so many times where I'll be out in the parking lot, just being like, what just happened? Right. So that's why now I'm like, you need to write everything down. Do not tell me anything unless I get it in writing, because it's just, that's like, talk about overstimulation. That is a
Yeah.
totally overstimulating environment. So bring lots of paperwork, bring checklists, think of like, some of the traits that you identify with, some of the things where you're like, really like, oh my God, this is me. And that can be really, really helpful when it comes to
Yeah.
articulating, because that's what doctors are looking for. They're looking for
It
kind of
was,
evidence.
yeah. It was helpful for me when I had already missed two doctor's appointments before, and doctor's appointments, and they're like, Jenna, you missed two. I just, oh yeah. That kind of boded well for me with the evidence side of things. So,
Right. I know. Well, and I had a very similar experience with my doctor, where it was like I had all this shuffled paperwork that I brought with me and all these notes and these checklists. And I was like, here, here, here. And she was like, shh, you had me at hello. Like, it's okay. But we get that feeling like we have to convince them. Right. And so it's like we have to convince the doctor that we have this. And then when we get diagnosed, we're like, was I too good at convincing that? And then you go into that
Yeah.
statement of questioning, like, oh, did I fool them?
Totally.
Right. So there's just a lot of anxiety around the whole experience.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's really helpful to have that like part of like there are checklists that are designed for women, and I will absolutely link to Sari Solden's because I adore her. So I'll link to that in the show notes. And I think that that's just like such a really beautiful place to start to have that conversation with your doctor. And I want to make a note too on medication. I will link some stuff on medication and breastfeeding in the show notes too, because that's a conversation I have with people all the time. So that will be there if you're breastfeeding and you're curious. But then I also wanted to say, so like after that, you're talking about these treatment plans that have like so many different pieces to them. That's not just medication. So when you're talking with your doctor and they're like, yes, you have a diagnosis, and you're like, cool, you get to play with some medication and have, and see some things. And medication has made a difference in my life. And I always say, and I still have ADHD. I have medication and I still have ADHD. It's all together. It's both and, right? So what are some other areas that are really supportive in that kind of beginning journey of, after your ADHD diagnosis?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that also kind of speaks to a lot of the women I work with who are newly diagnosed, and they come to me and they're like, I just found out what's wrong with me. Let's fix it. And I'm
Right.
like, okay, we need to unpack all of that. Right. Because so much of this, like you said, is not necessarily trying to fix this ADHD. It's like, how can I live with it? How can I embrace it? How can I manage it in a way that feels good, but also like a lot of these character flaws that we had believed were terrible about us are really, some wonderful gifts that if we can understand them and manage them, we can, a lot of that involves reframing more than it involves fixing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a concept that I learned from the Radical Guide for Women with ADHD. It was really like, you can be an extraordinary human being and also need a lot of help and a lot of support. But the only thing that needs fixing are dogs and furniture.
Yeah.
That's what they say, right? So with the treatment plan, I mean, for me, I kind of like to think about it as this holistic approach. So there's, obviously one of the number one ways that we can manage our ADHD right off the bat, easy, free, is movement, right? And I'm not talking about a gym membership or buying a Peloton. Like, I'm not, if you have ADHD, you're going to be like, all right, I'm going to have to like go at this whole hog, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to buy a new outfit and new shoes. And so yeah, if that was your instant reaction, then there's a tip off. Yeah. But really just like getting outside, getting your heart rate elevated, moving a little bit every day, whatever that looks like, I think is probably one of the best, like one of the single best things we can do for our brains. And it's hard. It's hard when you have little ones, right? It's hard when you're tired all the time. But if there's a way that we can kind of work that into our lives, that will make a huge difference. Which brings me to this idea of like self-advocacy, which is starting to recognize what are some of the things I need and how can I put myself forward a bit, right? Which as moms is really hard. And, we keep hearing all of the, like, you got to give yourself the oxygen before you give it to anyone else. And you can't pour from an empty cup. But it's like, there's just a lot of eye rolling because your family doesn't accommodate that very much. Like you really have to start putting your foot down with your partner or, and saying like, these are the things I need to show up as the best version of me. And that's a real like cognitive shift, I think, for a lot of women, which is like, no, I should be able to do that. I should be able to do everything. And I'm not going to ask for help unless I'm literally at my breaking point. And that's another thing we have to start unpacking, which is like, no, actually, you deserve help before you're at your breaking point. You deserve help before you even get anywhere near that. And so what does that look like? And how can you kind of self-advocate? And how can you even articulate for yourself what you need, right? Like even going back to the emotional dysregulation, like sometimes you don't even know what help you need. It's really hard to kind of figure that out. So I think having some grace is really important. Education and research, I think, is one of the amazing things about, in terms of what resources are out there. The reason why I called my podcast Women and ADHD was because the first thing I did when I was diagnosed with ADHD was I typed women ADHD into Apple Podcasts, and I found Tracy Otsuka's podcast, where ADHD for Smartass Women, and I listened to like 75 episodes just nonstop with my jaw on the floor. But it's like really finding out as much as possible so that you can, I think this diagnosis is what it is information, right? I think so many of us don't look at this as a negative pathological disorder, because really what it is an opportunity to understand why we are the way we are, why we're doing things, and what is happening.
Right.
And that there's
seeing
something
it more
wrong
as that,
with us.
seeing it more as that like neurotype versus like the disorder. It's like, this is the way my brain is. This is who I am. This is my brain. It functions this way. And in truth, I mean, it perhaps seems controversial, but the reason why we struggle the way that we do is because the rest of the world doesn't need to function the way that we function, right? So it's just not set up to accommodate us. So we just need different things than the rest of the world. But because we were different, we just like assumed that it was us, that we were the problem. So then we blame ourselves and we have all this shame and we think, well, we must be alone in this, but it's just not the case. So I love that you brought that up. I use like this framework when I'm coaching and in my courses, like compassion, curiosity, creativity. So it's like really starting with that compassion first. And it's kind of like a bullseye. It looks like a boob. and then we start with like compassion and so much self-compassion. And it's only through doing that we can like kind of peel off the layers of shame and love ourselves enough to be present, to get curious about what our needs are. And then from that place, we can creatively problem solve. And I think that the thing with ADHD and the thing with toddler breastfeeding and the thing with all of these wonderful things that are perhaps not the norm, right, is that we need to do things differently. And it's creativity. It's looking at the world and having to think a little outside the box for yourself and saying, okay, what are my needs and how do I need to show up for myself right now? And once you can kind of break away from having to do things the way everybody else does them, it's like, whoa, this whole new world opens up for you. But it takes some work to get to that place. So it's not an overnight kind of deal.
Yeah, right. I love the term creative problem solving because it really is, one of my favorite phrases that I use all the time in my own life and with my clients is this is information, right? And this is information. If something's happening and you've been yelling at everybody or so, you're having these moments of just overload, sometimes it helps to really kind of just stop and step outside of the emotional reaction, which is, oh, I'm such a failure. What's wrong with me? I'm so terrible. Those are all emotional reactions. But if we can say, this is information, what am I going to learn from this? How am I going to, what can we do differently next time? Those are all kind of these logical, like observant, like almost anthropological observations about the situation.
It's like
where we can
neutral. It's like a neutral, like looking at it, like neutrality brought to it. So you can be present with it, right? You're not like stuck in some trigger about it, right? So
and it's only in that state of mind that you can, like you said, it's only from that state of mind can you move into a state of problem solving. When you're still in the emotional state of mind, you're just treading water. And so you won't be in a position to solve anything. You're just going to be in a state of constant crisis.
Yeah.
And right. And so it's like, what are some of the strategies that we can have for ourselves to just sort of get us out of that frame of mind as quickly as possible?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's when I love talking about the neuroscience, because from a super practical perspective, like the part of your brain that is thinking and responsible for problem solving goes offline when you're like in a hyper emotional state. Like you don't have access to it. It's not there. So, it's not like, oh, I have to white knuckle this and like get through it. It's like actually like that's only gonna make things worse from a super basic scientific kind of like standpoint, like there's nothing wrong with you for not being able to problem solve when you're shaming and blaming yourself and beating yourself up emotionally, right? Like it just won't work.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so really like driving home that idea that there was never anything wrong with you. You just needed the right tool. I like to use the example with my kids of the left-handed scissors in terms of this idea that there was never anything wrong with you. Right. Which is really that, if everybody else in the room is using scissors and they're doing great and they're cutting and there's no issues, and then they hand them to you and you just happen to be left-handed and you're trying these scissors and they're not cutting and you don't know what you're doing wrong. And everybody else is like, I don't know what's wrong. They work fine for me. And you're like, I keep trying. And they're just like, try harder, try hard. It doesn't matter how hard you try. It's never going to work. And then so it's the same idea, like you were saying, like there's only so much you can try to jam this until you have to stop and say, I don't have the right tools right now. This is never going to work for me.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So I think that brings us to a great place to say, if you're listening to this podcast and you're saying like, oh my God, I've been trying to just white knuckle this. I've been just trying to force my little left hand or my right hand into these right-handed scissors and cut, or force my left hand into these right-handed scissors and cut. And it's just not working anymore. There are a lot of resources out there. And, maybe you typed women and ADHD into this and breastfeeding, I don't know, into this Spotify, and you came across this podcast. Where are some ways that people can connect with you, Katy?
Well, there is the podcast, which is called Women and ADHD. And the website is also a good place to start because I like all roads lead out from the website. So that is womenandadhd.com. I have the online community too, which is just that's where some of the experts that you were talking about, like Kaylin, are talking about medication. Every month we have an expert talk about a new topic that's related to ADHD. And that's in the community. And then I'm on Instagram I have two accounts on Instagram. There's the Women in ADHD podcast account. And then there's my personal account, which is katyweber.adhd. And what am I forgetting? Anything? I don't know. You'll have you can find it all.
Yeah,
on the website.
I'll have all the links. And Katy's like, I always feel like if there's something coming up, and this has absolutely happened before, I post about it in the like community, or I'll DM Katy, and there's always a resource available. There's always something that we can do. In fact, talking about movement and everything, I mean, I think it was last month you had somebody in on movement, right? You had Marnie in on movement. Talking about
no, she's coming up. Yeah,
she's coming up. Okay, yeah, I haven't seen her yet.
Like this Sunday.
Okay. Oh, that's right. I was like, I knew it. I thought I missed it. My brain. Make sure it's in the calendar, or else I forget it. But yeah, there's always something. So I love that so much, and it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on, Katy. As always, it's so fun to hang out with you.
Oh, I love chatting with you too. And so I feel like even just if people are listening and just adore you, that might also be an instant. If they feel like very connected to you, I'm also like, sometimes you realize that all of your best friends also had ADHD. We didn't realize.
Oh yeah. 100%. One of my best friends, like there's a few of us that have ADHD, but she's also in the group. And I'm like, well, sweetheart, I mean, if this isn't a sign, I don't know. I don't know what is. Absolutely.
Do you remember what episode number you are for you should put a link to that to the conversation.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I will.
Great conversation.
Yeah, I definitely will. I've had a lot of people reach out from that podcast still. It's been like out for like a year or more, and it's really fun to see it still kind of circulating and people benefiting from it. So that's great.
So,
all right. Thanks, Katy. If you loved this episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any episodes in the future. Also, check out my breastfeeding toddler communication guide and cheat sheet to learn how to say no to the feed while still saying yes to the need at www.ownyourparentingstory.com/guide. And that concludes another episode of Start to Stop Toddler Breastfeeding. The theme song is Little Balloon by Jenny and Tyler, and it has been a pleasure to share this time with you. I'll catch you in the next episode.